2367, Foundation. US Nash Bridge 2367.1, 1.07, 0812. Captain Richard McKinley was glad to see Earth growing large on the view screen. His ship was crammed to the rafters with former colonists. These people had been living near the Federation-Kardashian border. But now, there was an armistice with the Kardashians. And there were rumors that a more formal Federation-Kardashian treaty was in the works. And these people had not intention of waiting for that hammer to fail, so they had booked passage on the Nash. "Entering standard orbit, sir," Lieutenant Hank McCoy, the Nash's chief pilot, said. "Excellent," McKinley said. "Beam down course and schedule on main viewer." "Aye, Captain." McCoy worked the console, and the main screen changed. The view of Earth was replaced by a map with a red line on it. Said line was the Nash's course. Blue dots marked the places that they would be beaming people down to. Next to each dot were 3 pieces of information. First was the name of the destination, then came the time of the beam down, and finally the number of people that would be going there. One name on the screen made McKinley frown. Nothing, Arizona, Tilda. It had been his grandfather, Brewster, who had crashed the SS Rusty Bucket near that town. After he had been treated for his injuries, Brewster had been sentenced to 10 years in jail for a laundry list of charges. Ironically, it had been that prison sentence that had broken the McKinley curse. In jail, there had been no alcohol, and the jail staff had included an excellent therapist called Gerald Jones. Jones had helped Brewster deal with all the demons that had driven him to drink. Brewster had left jail in much better shape, physically and mentally, than as he had come in. 2 weeks after his release, Brewster had met Asami Kimura while traveling through Japan. The two of them had fallen in love instantly and gotten married less than 2 months later. And that had been that. Brewster had gotten his happily ever after and become the father of 3 boys and 2 girls, including Richard's mother, Hoshi. Hoshi had married a Starfleet officer called Zachary Peters, who had passed the Starfleet bug to his son. And here he was, 28 years old and already in the center seat of his own ship. "Captain, is something wrong?" McCoy asked, breaking his reverie. "No, Lieutenant. I was just pondering what our chances for short leave were." The Nash and crew had been working for 8 months straight. "I figure if we get everybody down there on time, maybe we can get a day or 2 off before our next run." He smiled at McCoy. "So, keep her steady and let's get to it." "Aye, Captain." McCoy turned his attention back to his station, while McKinley made a mental note to call his parents later. US Nash Transporter Room 2367.1, 1.07, 1205. Morak Wells was a Bajoran man. Until a couple of days ago, he had been a farmer on Valan 2. But when he had heard the rumors about a formal treaty between the Federation and Kardashians, he had decided to leave. He had no idea where he would settle, but Earth was the most distant destination available. And then he would take it from there. Well, technically from nothing. When he had booked his ticket, the system had asked him where on Earth he wanted to go. He had picked nothing, Arizona, because it was a ghost town in the middle of nowhere. Morak figured it gave him the best chance of beaming down alone. So he was surprised to find 3 more people in the transporter room. 2 of them were humans, a male and a female, and the last was a female Vulcan. The humans were wearing wedding rings. He stepped onto the transporter platform. Time to go. The transporter chief energized and... Earth, Arizona desert, outside, nothing 2367.1, 1.07, 1206. The transporter room was replaced by the Mojave Desert, and once again, Morak's expectations were not met. He had picked nothing after reading the town's entry in the Federation database, and according to that entry, this place should have been dead as a doornail. But instead, there were desert grasses, cacti, and even a few trees. Apparently, the local flora and fauna had recovered how they had been before the terraforming project, But none of this helped him with the big question. Tilda now what, Tilda? Morak walked into the town, which was a mix of ruins and abandoned buildings. He found a house that was dusty but intact. His plan was stay here until sunset, then head out. The house was a single room. There was a bed, a sink, a crude table with 2 chairs and hot plate. And all of it was covered in a thick layer of dust. Tilda, it'll do. Tilda, he dropped his bags on the floor. Are you staying? A male voice said. Morak turned to see the human male standing in the door opening. He was wearing a white shirt and jeans. Morak figured he was in his 30s. His eyes were green and he had blonde hair. Hello, I'm John Wright, the man began. What's your name? Well, on Badger I would be Morak Wells, but since we're on Earth it's Wells Morak. He walked towards Wright. And no, I intended to head out once the sun sets. What about you? My family used to live here. I'm not the first John in the family, he made a face. A fair few of them were waiters in town's bar, the old tent. Me and my wife Amy are going to try to get it going again. Good luck with that, but I don't think you'll get much costumers out here in the middle of nowhere. Well, if you want a drink, you're always to come by, Wright said. And with that, John turned and left Morak. His wife Amy had picked one of the larger houses to become the new old tent. Cleaning the place would not be easy because the place didn't even have running water. They did have some supplies, but without water, those were useless. Fortunately, John had brought plenty of tools and supplies. He entered the house and grabbed a scanner before heading out to do some research. The scanner was the model used aboard Enterprise NX-01. It was ancient, but it got the job done. He was running scans when a female voice broke his concentration. Your plan is highly illogical. That's the beauty of being human. You don't have to be logical if you don't want to. He looked up to see the female Vulcan who had beamed down with them. I'm John Wright, and you are. I am V. Liva of Vulcan. I am here to study the recovery of the local ecosystem. It is logical to set up my base of operations within this area. Good luck with that, John said, while suppressing a chuckle. Tilda, you just said what Morak said to you to her, Tilda. V. Liva simply raised an eyebrow in reply. John shook his head and got back to work. Getting the old tent going again would not be easy. After the water, there would be the issues of electric power and heating, and he was sure that there were surprises waiting for them in the wings. So he kept scanning. Earth, Mojave Desert, 2367.1 1.07, 2105. The sun had set, so Morak had become walking towards the town of Wickenburg. Once he reached the town, he would get himself a ride to Las Vegas. And from what he heard about the Las Vegas spaceport, he would be able to get a ticket to dozens of planets there. The reason he had not beamed down to Wickenburg was simple. He wanted to be alone. People tended to pity Bajorans. Morak knew they meant well, but it was annoying. So in his mind, the less people he met along the way, the better. He was several kilometers away from nothing when he noticed lights in the distance, and they were heading towards him. As they approached, he realized it was a group of people. Many of them were Bajoran like him, but there were also humans, Andorians, Bolians, and plenty of other species. He figured that there was about 70 of them, and besides being various species, they were also a mix of genders and ages. Morak figured that some of them were families. Night, Morak said. Is this the road to nothing, Arizona? A Bajoran man, who was apparently the leader of the group, asked. Yes, Morak began. But there is, he snickered. Nothing there, I mean, it's a ghost town without a services or facilities. Well, except for 2 crazy humans trying to set up a bar. Sounds good to me, the man said. Morak shook his head and continued on his way, walking out of the history of nothing. The other Bajoran man, who was indeed the leader of his group, continued on his way towards Ghost Town. He had been born Daza Korav. But because people kept getting his name wrong, he now went through life as Korav Daza. Like Morak, he had been farmer on Valan too. In fact, he had recognized Morak, but the man had always been a loner, so he had not pointed that out. And where Morak had decided to go at it alone, he had gathered everybody who wanted to leave, and they had headed out together. "Daddy, why are we going to this place?" Chor'dan had married his wife Laren Day 7 years ago. They had tried to have children, but their doctor had given them the heartbreaking news that Laren was unable to have them. It had put a strain on their relationship. But then their neighbor, a Bolian man called Hayat Karos, had gotten involved. He had gotten the two of them to talk. 2 weeks later, they had adopted 3 children. Quincy and Xavier were 2 human twins who were now 12 years old. Their 3rd child was a Badgerin girl called Nuris. She was 15 years old and had been the one who had asked the question. "Why do you think we are going there, Nuris?" "I don't know, that's why I asked." Nuris bit her lower lip. "I mean, we're going to a place that is, well, empty." "So was our farm back on Valan too. When your mom and I first got there, it was just an empty field. There was no farm, no greenhouse, and no well. We had to build all of it ourselves," Chor'dan said, "but there was one good thing about it. We could make it the way we wanted. Because the people who made the rules didn't show up until after we were done. And by then, it was too late. So, it's like one of Mom's empty canvases. Laren was a painter. And we can paint whatever we want on it." Nuris smiled at that. "Tilde nothing, here we come," Tilde Chor'dan thought as they continued down the road. "Nothing. Arizona, the old tent, 2367.11.07, 0815. John Wright still had plenty of stuff to do. He had managed to get the water running. It had been nasty and brown at first, but after several more hours of tinkering, it had become clear. Today, he would see about electricity and then take it from there. John and Amy had just finished breakfast when there was a knock at the door. They exchanged looks before John went to open the front door. He opened the door to find a Badgerin man. It was not Wells Morak. "Welcome to the old tent, I'm John Wright," he said. "The lovely lady is my wife Amy." "I'm Chor'dan Daza, and I'm not alone." Chor'dan stepped aside and John stepped into the main street. There were people inside the houses, some were sleeping in the street. John smiled. Nothing. Arizona had just gone from being a ghost town to being a living, breathing place. 2373, Siana Thrax. Kardasha Prime Thrax Family Farm, outside Lacarian City. Kitchen 2373.3, 1.07, 0803. Siana had finished breakfast and packed her things for school. As it was every morning, the kitchen was chaos. Siana was the youngest of the 9 Thrax children. Born in 2356 to Seska and Krell Thrax, she was 17 now. She was also the only one still in school. All of the older Thrax children, 5 boys and 3 girls, all worked on the fields with Seska. Krell did the books and maintenance. Finally, there was her uncle Maker. Maker was Krell's brother and the first officer of a Graumal-class freighter called the Rista. Because of his job, he was away most of the time. But he had a room in the house that he used when he was here, and it was always great to have him around. He had taught Siana to hunt when she was 15. Siana was about to leave when there was a knock at the door. "Tilde, who's that?" Tilde Seska opened the door. From where she was standing, Siana could see that there were 3 people in military uniforms standing outside the farm. Seska Thrax, by order of the Kardashian Central Command, all adults over 18 in Quadrant 7A. This area of farmland included the Thrax farm and 18 others, each home to large families, are to be drafted for military service. "You can't do this. The Central Command is no longer in charge. The Datapa Council has been dissolved." The man who was doing the talking appeared to be a gull. "In case you missed the news, Kardasha has joined the Dominion." The news of Kardasha joining the Dominion had shocked everybody in the Thrax household when it had hit 2 days ago. Krell had called Maker right away to check up on him. Fortunately, The Rista had been on the far side of the Union when the new alliance had gone to war against the Klingons and Maquis. The gull gestured for all of them to leave the farmhouse. While it was unsaid, everybody knew that if they didn't go outside themselves, the soldiers would drag them out. So they all followed the order. There were soldiers waiting outside the fence. There were 9 of them, guarding 20-plus draftees. Clearly, the Thrax home had not been their first stop. Oddly enough, there was also a man in a suit. The gull and the 2 soldiers lined the Thrax family up. Then the man in the suit took out a tricorder and began scanning them one by one. When he got to Siana, he shook his head. 17, she's too young. He turned to the gull. We can always draft her later, should it be necessary. What about the parents? They are too old, sir. Siana realized that man in the suit was the unit's doctor. And my records indicate that the father has served previously. He suffered injuries that made him unsuitable for further service. Very well, he turned to the soldiers. Take the rest. If they resist, shoot the parents. The soldiers nodded and removed Siana, Krell, and Seska from the line. Then they forced the others to join the draftees in the road. Siana could do nothing but watch them go. Cardassia Prime Thrax Family Farm. Siana's room 2373.01.08. 0737. Yesterday had been the worst day in Siana's life. She had lost everybody except her parents. She had gone to school, but she couldn't remember anything about the lessons. The whole day was a blur. Well, except for those horrible 5 minutes. She had gone to bed the moment dinner had been over, hoping that the whole thing had just been a nightmare. That she would wake up and all her siblings would be here, safe and sound. But when she opened her eyes, all she heard was silence. Tilda, they're gone. They're really gone. Tilda, then the door opened and Uncle Maker came in. He didn't say anything, but simply wrapped his arms around her. And finally, all the tears and agony she had been holding in came out. She had no idea how long they were like that, but it felt like forever. Then he broke the silence. A shower and breakfast will help, he said. Then we'll talk. What about school? I'll take care of it, she gave her a warm smile. You don't become first officer without learning how to yell about the right people. I'm so glad you're here. He kissed her on the forehead, then left. She took a deep breath and went to pick her clothes for today. Cardassia Prime Thrax Family Farm. Kitchen 2373.01.08. 0835. Uncle Maker had been right. She felt a lot better having showered and eaten. Tilda, he's good this uncle thing. Tilda, she had always thought that he would make a good dad as well. While she had been eating, Krell and Maker had been talking about what to do next. Siana had expected them to be yelling after what had happened. The 2 of them disagreed about politics a lot, but instead they were calm and collected. Tilda, if the Dominion makes the 2 of them agree, they must be bad news. Tilda Maker entered the kitchen and sat down, while Krell talked to Seska. When Krell was done, Seska simply nodded in agreement. They joined Siana and Maker at the kitchen table. Siana, Krell began, we and Uncle Maker had been talking and, he sighed. The truth is that Cardassia Prime isn't safe for you anymore. Daddy, what are you saying? You heard what that doctor said. You're too young for military service now, but next year. They will come for you, Siana. Maker finished the sentence. I'm not trying to scare you, Si. He was the only one who called her that. But I made some calls to people I trust. And these Dominion people, they are bad. It's only a matter of time before war erupts. You need to leave Cardassian space. And where? It clicked in her head. The Federation, are you serious? Starfleet is a volunteer organization. The Federation doesn't draft its citizens. You'll be safe. Siana was about to object, but the look on her parents' faces made it clear that they were worried about losing their last child. Even if her siblings made it back, they would be different. Tilda scared by war. Tilda and they didn't want that to happen to her. So they were sending her away to keep her out the fighting. How will get me there? Rista is going on a run towards one of the solar systems near the border next week. I'll smuggle you aboard and launch you across the border in one of her escape pods." Maker paused. "I won't lie, if they catch us, we will both get executed, but in the long term, this is the best chance you have." Part of Siana still doubted, but she knew that her parents were simply trying to protect her. So she nodded agreement and considered the matter closed. Cardassia Prime Lacarian City Spaceport. Storage Bay 15,2373.08.08. 0402. Siana had said goodbye to her parents in the middle of the night. The Rista was launching at 0500, so Maker had to smuggle her on board now. So here they were, tiptoeing through the spaceport. The influence of the Dominion was already visible here. Lacarian City's spaceport had always been understaffed, especially in the security department. But now, there were Hadar soldiers reinforcing the security staff. Fortunately, Maker had already made fake identification papers for her before they arrived. So she had been able to get inside without getting caught. But now came the hard part: actually getting on board the Rista. Maker had modified a crate with all sorts of equipment. Once inside, she would be invisible to the ship's internal sensors, while an air scrubber would allow her to breathe. There was food and water in the box. There was even a bucket for, well, relief, and a supply of toilet paper. It wouldn't be very comfortable, but she would be able to hide for a couple of days. She climbed into the crate. "Tilda, here goes." Tilda, her uncle, gave her a smile and then put the lid in place. A couple of minutes later, she could feel the crate moving. As she was loaded onto the Rista, she pondered prayer. But then she remembered that she, like the rest of the Thrax family, didn't believe in gods. Tilda might want to reconsider that. Then the crate came to a stop, but the lid remained solidly in place. Now it was a waiting game. CDS Rista Cargo Bay 2373.1, 4.08, 0607. It had been a little over 6 days since the Rista had left Cardassia Prime, and she was now as close to the Federation as she was ever going to get. So the time had come for Siana to leave the crate and get into the escape pod. But as soon as the left the crate and stretched, a male voice made her jump. "So, this is the niece you brag about so much." Siana turned to see a gull standing in the doorway. He was armed with a disruptor pistol. "Sir, I can." "No need," the gull put away his disruptor. "I have children myself. My wife wrote me a rather angry letter about the draft, and if it gets under my wife's skin," he smiled. "Come on, let's get you across the border." "Thank you, sir." The gull didn't say anything, but simply led them into the corridor. It wasn't very far to the nearest escape pod. Siana took a deep breath and climbed into the pod. It was designed to hold 4 people. At least it's not so cramped as the crate. And it came with a proper toilet. She closed the hatch and heard it lock. There was a jolt as the escape pod launched. This was followed by the escape pod rattling as it fell out of the Rista's warp field. Once the rattling stopped, she looked around for the controls. They were located in a small alcove across from the toilet. Siana climbed in and activated them. Flight controls. The display showed a map with her current location indicated by a red dot. Here we go. She plotted a course for the Federation and fired the thrusters. She had truly left Cardassia behind now. Escape Pod 2 Main Room 2373.0, 5.09, 1218. The escape pod was moving as fast as it could. Because they didn't have a cooling system, the thrusters could only be fired in bursts. Siana had fired as much bursts as she could. But on day 5, she had run out of fuel. Still, it felt like she was crawling across a vast desert of stars. She had enough food and water for another 3 weeks, but she would run out of air in 3 days. Well, I guess there's worse way to. Then her escape pod jolted. Is that a tractor beam? She got her answer as the escape pod was put down on a deck. Of course, there was the question of who owned the ship that deck was a part of. If it was a Kardashian or Dominion ship, she would be in major trouble. And she didn't want to think about how Starfleet would treat her if it was one of their ships. Only one way to find out. Siana made her way to the hatch and pressed the buttons to open it. A loud hiss was followed by a series of clicks, and then the hatch slid aside. At first, the lights were very bright as she climbed out. But then her eyes adjusted, and she saw that she was in a Federation cargo bay. "Hello, anybody here?" she said as she climbed down to the floor. 3 people entered the cargo bay. They were in civilian clothes. 2 of them were blue with antennae on their head, and 1 was pink. This was the first time that Siana had met somebody who wasn't Kardashian, so she felt a knot of worry grow in her stomach. The pink one was carrying a small metallic cylinder with a light on top. The light was blinking red at first, but the pink one pressed some buttons and it turned solid green. "Hello, I am Captain Henry O'Neill. This is Dr. Abaris." He pointed to one of the 2 blue ones. This one appeared to be female, and this is Chief Engineer Amal. The other blue one was male. "You're aboard the SS Oregon. She's a civilian freighter, and we're on our way to Earth's solar system." "Earth? Is that a Federation planet?" "Yes, it's the capital. Now, Dr. Abaris needs to make sure you're healthy, so I need you to go with him to our sickbay." "Yes, Captain." She followed Abaris out the cargo bay. SS Oregon Sickbay, 2373.0, 5.09, 12:35. Siana sat on one of the beds in sickbay. Dr. Abaris had examined her and found that she was healthy. In the meantime, she had told the doctor about how her siblings had been taken away and how Uncle Maker had smuggled her into Federation space. In return, Abaris had told her about Andorians, her own species, humans, and the Federation. She was reading a pad about Earth and its solar system when Captain O'Neill came in. "How's our latest arrival doing, Doctor?" "Her name is Siana Thrax, and all her bits and pieces are in working order," Abaris said. "Everything else falls under doctor-patient confidentially, Skipper." "Thank you, Doctor." He sat down on one of the other beds and took out a recorder. "So, Siana, how did you end up in Federation space?" "May I?" She put down the pad and O'Neill handed her the recorder. "My name is Siana Thrax and I'm Kardashian." She recapped the same things she had told Dr. Abaris. Then she handed the recorder back to Captain O'Neill, who turned it off. "Thank you for saving me from that escape pod, Captain." "So, what happens next?" "Well, I think it's time we introduce you to Federation food. Then we'll see about getting you a guest cabin." "I was thinking more long-term, sir." "You don't have to call me sir, and we'll drop you off on Earth." "From what I've read so far, Earth is, well, really big." She picked up the pad. "So, where exactly on Earth?" "We can beam you down wherever you want, so you have some thinking to do." O'Neill jumped off the bed. "I have to go back to the bridge, but the mess hall is open at all times, and Dr. Abaris can help you find that cabin." "Thank you, Captain." O'Neill left, and Siana went back to reading. She had some research to do before they reached Earth. Earth Mojave Desert, 2373.2, 5.10, 0630. Siana had arrived on Earth several days after being picked up by the Oregon. She had gone down to a town called Cape Town. She had wandered Earth for a while before traveling to Luna and then Mars. From there, she had gone to Titan and Pluto. After a couple of stops in the asteroid belt, she was now back on Earth. She had arrived at Los Angeles before traveling to Las Vegas. After 2 days in Vegas, she was now on her way to Phoenix, Arizona. Unfortunately, she was running low on supplies. She had thought that the Federation didn't use money, but the truth was they did. They were called Federation credits. Siana had been putting her cooking skill to good use earning them. As for her current destination, she was chasing a rumor. She had heard whispers about a town of refugees called Nothing. Siana had spent her last credits on a tent in case the town didn't exist. But then she spotted a building on the horizon. As she got closer, she saw more structures and realized that the town was a lot bigger than the rumors claimed. Tilda shouldn't be hard to find a place to sleep here. Tilda, her plan was to stay today, get a good night of sleep, and then leave. As she walked into the town, she spotted a tavern called the Old Tent. Tilda sounds like a good place to start. Tilda, she entered the tavern and looked around. The people sitting at the tables were a mix of species and ages. A young human stood behind the bar. Tilda, he's cute. Tilda, one of the customers called him William. Then somebody turned to her. It was a human male with short, red hair and blue eyes. "Hello, welcome to the Old Tent," the man began. "I'm Francis Morris, but everybody calls me Frank." "I'm Siana Thrax. Shouldn't you be surprised to see a Kardashian on Earth?" "No, we have people from all over the place. Here in Nothing, the only politics we care about are the local elections." He smiled at her. "And everybody is welcome, so pick your poison." "Yeah, I'm not really doing that good in the credits department." "Nobody is. You'll fit right in. Now, what do you want?" "I'm in the mood for some milk and 2 tuna sandwiches." "Coming right up." Frank left to get her order, while Siana looked around to find herself a seat. Fortunately, she found an empty stool at the bar. The bad news was that the cute barkeep wasn't there anymore. As she looked around the bar, an odd-looking animal came skittering across the bar. It had a collar with a name tag that translated as ashes. She petted the animal. It was dry and scaly. Then Frank came back with her breakfast. As she bit into the first sandwich, her taste buds and instincts told her that she might up staying a lot longer than planned. 2374, Yenna Chor'dan. IPS Old Rusty Cockpit, 2374.2, 2.09, 0830. The Imperial Postal Service was a branch of the Romulan government, and it was exactly what it said on the tin. To deliver parcels and packages throughout the Romulan Star Empire, they owned 8 freighters and a whole fleet of shuttles. After the Romulans had re-entered the galactic stage in 2364, the Star Empire had signed several agreements with the Federation. One was an anti-Borg pact, but another allowed the passage of packages and parcels between the Federation and the Romulan Star Empire. As part of the latter, the IPS had established routes between Romulan colonies and Starfleet starbases. Route 3 ran between Valerius Prime and Starbase 276. It had been the assignment of the Old Rusty since she had rolled off the assembly line in 2365. Old Rusty was a Class C shuttle. This class of shuttle was the same size of Federation-type 9A cargo shuttle. But it took 2 people to operate the Federation version, while Old Rusty only had 1 crew member. That crew member was Yenna Chor'dan. 26 years old, she was daughter of Sirius and Tyrell Chor'dan. She also had a brother called Remus, who was 4 years older. Sirius was a history teacher, while Tyrell sat on the colony's Council of Agriculture. And Remus was an engineer at the Valerius spaceport. Yenna had just dropped off a load on Starbase 276, and now she was on her way back home. The Federation and the Klingons were at war with the Dominion. Until recently, the Romulan Star Empire had been neutral in this war. But then the Dominion had killed a senator called Vreenak, and soon after, the Star Empire had joined the fighting. For Yenna and the IPS, this had resulted in a lot more work. Old Rusty's cargo section had been practically empty on her trip to the starbase, but now it was loaded to the brim. She was double-checking the manifest when her long-range sensors sounded the tactical alarm. "What the hell?" Yenna said as she sat down behind the controls. The sensors had detected 4 Hadar warships, and they were heading straight for Valerius Prime. Crap. Her tactical options were far from good. Old Rusty had a top speed of warp 4.5. As far as weapons went, she had 2 forward disruptors and 2 aft ones. They were equal in firepower to Type 4 phaser emitters. Her fingers flew across the controls as she tried to send a warning to Valerius Prime. But the computer told her that it was unable to connect. Tilda, they must have taken out one of the relays already. Tilda, which was not a good sign. She looked at her reflection and brushed her blonde hair from her green eyes. Tilda could on, Yenna. There has to be something you can do. Tilda, taking a deep breath, she looked at the warp controls. Old Rusty was doing warp 4.1 at the moment. She increased speed to warp 3.5, then turned off everything she could and diverted the power. Tilda, warp 4.51, 4.52, come on, girl, 4.53, 4.54. Tilda, but that was the best she could do. All she could do now was hope it would be enough. IPS Old Rusty Cockpit, 2374.2, 2.09, 1303. The past couple of hours felt like an eternity. Tilda, is this what humans mean with relativity? Tilda, it felt like time itself had slowed down. On her any other flight, Yenna would have been singing to pass the time. But this time, there was a knot of worry in her stomach that kept her staring at the clock. Then the communications section of the controls beeped. It was an emergency message from relay station Valerius 1. Valerius 1 was not located at Valerius Prime, but was safely tucked away deep inside an asteroid located at the edge of system. Yenna figured that was why it had survived long enough to transmit a message. Tilda, here goes. Tilda, she pressed play. //equals attention, all vessels. The colony on Valerius Prime has been destroyed. I repeat, the colony on Valerius Prime has been destroyed. Do not enter this system. There are no survivors. //equals. The message ended and Yenna's stomach dropped. Tilda, Dad, Mom, even Remus. He's an idiot, but I love him. Tilda, her brother could be a pain in the rear, but he was family. He was the reason the tip left ear was missing. Remus had been practicing with an energy rifle when he had accidentally blasted her left ear off. Their family doctor had managed to heal the wound, but the tip had never grown back. The mere idea of having lost all her family made her stomach turn like there was a tornado inside. Tilda, the message said there were no survivors. Tilda, but Yenna refused to believe that. She continued on her course towards Valerius Prime. IPS Old Rusty Cockpit, 2374.2, 2.09, 1355. Yenna's luck ran out less than an hour after she got the message from the relay. The communications system raised the alarm first because the long-range channels were being jammed. Then, the long-range sensors detected a Jem'Hadar fighter on an intercept course. Tilda, blast. Tilda, she dropped the Old Rusty out of warp and swung her about. Her only chance was getting back to Starbase 276. The big problem was that Jem'Hadar fighters could do at least warp 7, which meant that Old Rusty couldn't outrun it. She reduced speed to warp 4 so that she could divert power to the shields and weapons. Tilda, think, Yenna, think. Tilda, the Jem'Hadar ship was closing fast, and her disruptors were useless at warp. Unfortunately, the Jem'Hadar could fire on her. They hit Old Rusty with their main weapon, reducing her shields to 20%. Yenna diverted all the remaining power to the aft shields, but that only brought them back up to 45%. Out of options, she dropped out of warp. Another energy bolt barely missed her. Shields down to 33%. Yenna threw the shuttle through a turn, so that when the Jem'Hadar came out of it warp, she was not where they expected her to be. They only hit empty space, while Yenna fired the Old Rusty's forward disruptors. She scored 3 hits, but her weapons didn't even but a dent in the enemy shields. Tilda, come on, girl, you can do it. Tilda, the Jem'Hadar hit her again. Shields offline. Aft disruptors offline. Yenna sent all the power to the forward disruptors and fired again. She scored 2 more hits, but to no avail. The computer told her that the Jem'Hadar had locked weapons on her. Tilda, this is it. Tilda, and then 2 photon torpedoes hit the Jem'Hadar. Before she could gasp, a Klingon bird of prey came into view and cut loose with its disruptors. The fighter that had been attacking her exploded, but the long-range sensors indicated that 3 more were on the way. Time to go, Yenna. She took the old Rusty back to warp. The shuttle didn't like the acceleration one bit, and the lights flickered while one of them exploded. But she made it to faster than light. Still, Yenna suspected that the damage would back to haunt her. IPS Old Rusty Cockpit, 2374.2, 4.09, 0917. Starbase 276 was finally a dot on her sensor display, and Yenna was glad to see it. She was exhausted. For the past 2 days, she had been dodging the fighting. She had also come across wreckage of ships destroyed by the Hadar. There had also been 2 Hadar wrecks. Now, she has only a few minutes away from safety. Maybe even a ride back home. But first she had to land at the starbase. Then she put the shuttle through the last turn to put it on an approach course, and her heart sank. Starbase 276 was a traditional mushroom-shaped Starfleet base. But the sensors showed that large chunks of that shape were missing now. The damage had clearly been done by weapons fire. Bloody hell. She tried hailing the starbase, but there was no reply. Stay at warp as long as you can. Yenna bit her lower lip and did her best to hold her nerve. Finally, she reduced speed to full impulse. At that speed, she was still 3 minutes away. She hailed the starbase again. Still no answer. But then the space station launched a Danube class on an intercept course. She slowed to 1/4 impulse and hit several buttons on the communications controls. IPS Old Rusty to Starfleet vessel. // Old Rusty, this is USS Acel. // a male voice said. // come to full stop and provide security code. // Okay, coming to full stop. Her fingers flew across the controls and soon Old Rusty stopped. Now, holding position, security code is 144 Alpha Gamma Bravo 6 Delta. // security code clears out, but your flight plan has you returning to Valerius Prime. Why are you here? // Valerius Prime was wiped out by the Dominion. And she knew why. Because the colony was so close to the Federation, it was home to a listening station. But now that the Empire and Feds were allies, the station had been reassigned to monitoring Dominion ship movements. I tried to get there, but they're attacking anything with a heartbeat. // understood. We'll still need to perform a blood screening. // Shields are down. You can come over whenever you want. 10 seconds later, a Starfleet officer beamed aboard the shuttle. Starbase, 276 Conference Lounge, 27-2374.2, 5.09, 0815. Yenna was tuned out as a Starfleet officer droned on about the tactical situation. The only thing that penetrated the fog in her head was the fact 2 Starfleet ships had made it to Valerius Prime. They had spent days scanning planet and searching the debris. But there had been no survivors on the planet. The only survivors in the whole system had been the 3 Romulans manning Valerius I. The Hadar had attacked the relay, which had survived because its location deep inside the asteroid. That, and the fact that it was heavily armed. As for getting a ride back to Romulan space, the chances of that happening were 0. This sector and ones bordering it were one massive battlefield. Starfleet and the Imperial Navy had declared the whole theater a no-go zone for civilian ships. And their ships had better things to do than play shuttle service. Her cargo had been offloaded from the Old Rusty to a Federation freighter, which was headed to a depot 3 sectors over. Yenna had tried to contact her superiors in the IPS, but all the channels had been dead or jammed. So here she was, listening to the drone. The officer, a lieutenant, finally finished. So now what? With going back to Romulan Star Empire not being an option, she could either stay on the starbase or head deeper into Federation space. Starbase 276 was right on the edge of the fighting. So she found take all the food and water she could and head deeper into the Federation. She walked out of the conference lounge and got to work. IPS Old Rusty Cockpit, 2374.06.10, 1030. It had been days since she had left the starbase behind, and the fog in her head just kept getting thicker. It didn't help that she was down to 3 days' worth of food and water. Old Rusty did not have a connection between the replicator and the waste extraction unit. So when the supply of raw matter was done, the replicator became useless. It had given up the ghost 2 days ago, so now Yenna had to make do with what she had been get on the starbase. Can this get any worse? As if on cue, the lights went out and the shuttle dropped out of warp. The damage from her original fight with the Hadar had come home to roost. Yenna activated the emergency beacon. Then something exploded to her left and the world went black. SS Nautilus Sickbay, 2374.06.10, 1318. Yenna woke with a bad headache. The first thing that she saw was a bright light. She blinked and her eyes adjusted. A human male with short black hair and brown eyes was standing over her. He was wearing a lab coat and a stethoscope around his neck. Tilda classic doctor look. Tilda looking around, she realized that she was in a Federation sickbay. She tried to sit up, but the room began to spin. "Sorry, lass, but you'd better lay down on the bed," the doctor began. "You took a nasty knock to the head. I'm Dr. Jin Nakamura." Yenna was surprised. She had visited Starbase 276 often enough to know a couple of things about humans. Dr. Nakamura's name and appearance were Asian, but his accent was Scottish. "You're aboard the SS Nautilus, a Federation freighter. We detected you beacon and fished you and your ship out of space. Speaking of your ship, it was in rough shape. The captain will want to know what happened to it." Hadar, you know how they can be. Cranky, aggressive, always in the mood to vaporize shuttles. I've heard stories from Starfleet people." Nakamura scanned her with a tricorder. "You'll be fine, lass, but you need rest." She closed her eyes and went back to the world of black. SS Nautilus Shuttle Bay, 2374.1, 6.10, 0830. It had taken 2 days for Yenna to recover. She had met the Nautilus captain, a Bajoran man called Wells Morak. Morak had told her that his ship's final destination for this trip was in Sector 006. From there, she would have to continue of her way aboard the Old Rusty. While they had been en route, the Nautilus engineering department had been hard at work trying to repair the shuttle. But because the craft was powered by an artificial quantum singularity, there were some components they simply didn't have. Still, Old Rusty was in much better shape than she had been when she had left Starbase 276. "Hello, beautiful," Yenna said as she approached Old Rusty. "Ready to go back into the big black?" Dr. Nakamura asked as he entered the shuttle bay. "Yes, I've restocked my food and water. And your engineers did an excellent job on the replicator. They even connected it to the waste extraction unit, so I should be able to go for the foreseeable future." "Good luck." Yenna gave the doctor a nod and then boarded her shuttle. She ran the checklist. Tilda all good. Tilda then she fired the impulse drive and left the Nautilus shuttle bay behind. As she swung the ship to a new course, she could see that the Nautilus was a Sydney-class vessel. Tilda with all the bells and whistles. Tilda, from what Yenna could see, the ship was state-of-the-art. Then she took Old Rusty to warp. IPS Old Rusty Cockpit, 2374.0, 2.11, 0332. Yenna was in a land of nightmares. In her mind's eye, she was standing outside the family home. Her parents and Remus were preparing dinner. But then the Hadar fighters appeared in the sky above. Yenna screamed at the top of her lungs, trying to warn them, but no sound came from her mouth. And then the Hadar opened fire and she woke up screaming. Looking around, she realized she was in Old Rusty's cargo section. Before she could ponder her dream further, it hit her that the lights were out and that the computer was yelling at her. Power grid at critical levels. Repeat, power grid at critical levels. Yenna bolted to the cockpit. Her fingers flew across the controls as she tried to figure out what was wrong. Crap, the intercooler. The main intercooler had been one of the parts that the Federation folks had not been able to fix. And now it had packed in, causing a whole list of problem and failures. At the top of that list was the power grid, which was on the edge of overheating. She shut down what she could, but it was too late. Several lights exploded and parts of her console went dark. This is not good. She checked the navigational computer. Old Rusty was passing through a solar system, and not just any solar system. Earth. Then a second series of explosions, and more controls went dark. Yenna barely managed to turn Old Rusty towards Earth before gravity cut out. Fortunately, her chair came with seatbelts, and she was able to strap in. 3 seconds later, the shuttle began falling towards Earth like a brick. Crap. The shuttle heated up as it passed through the atmosphere. Yenna rerouted all the remaining power to the thrusters and fired them. The craft leveled off a bit. But still falling like a brick. Fortunately, the sensors showed that she was above uninhabited land. Better keep it that way. She fired the thrusters several more times, slowing her descent down further. After 3 more bursts, the main thrusters died completely. No. For a couple of seconds, all she had to work with was Old Rusty's aerodynamic qualities, which weren't all that great. Come on, old girl, don't let me down now. Finally, the chemical backup thrusters kicked in. She managed to get 8 more bursts before they ran out of fuel. This is it. Old Rusty plummeted to the surface. Fortunately, she had saved her last burst as long as she could, so she was only 9 meters above the ground. The warp nacelles hit the ground first, but the shuttle didn't stop, skidding along instead. Finally, the nose dug itself in. This is not good. She had barely completed the thought before her chair came loose. Yenna went flying chair and all and hit the rear bulkhead. The world began to wobble. Not again. And then she passed out. Nothing. Arizona Clinic. Main Ward 2374.0 2.11. 0930. This time, Yenna woke up to a lot of pain. Aboard the Nautilus, it had only been a headache, but now she hurt all over. On the bright side, that probably meant that everything was still in working order, or something close to it. She opened her eyes to see a male Bajoran doctor standing over her. I'm Dr. Heol, and you are lucky. This is my last day here. Where am I? You're on Earth, in a hellhole of a town called Nothing, Arizona. He threw down a clipboard Yenna only noticed now. Good luck. And with that, the doctor walked out. Yenna closed her eyes and felt the fog in her head. Even with the pain in her body, it had not been this thick since she had lost, well, everything. And then the dam broke. For weeks, she had been going on instinct and autopilot. But now all the sadness, loneliness, and pain she had been holding back were released.